Misinformation isn't something that just naturally occurs and is then unstoppable. One of the things about misinformation is that it can cover a whole range of topics. People may mislead you about vaccinations. They might mislead you about climate change. They might mislead you about political issues, about immigration. I mean, misinformation is everywhere and it can address any topic. If you get really angry or outraged if you read something on Twitter, or if you have a video on YouTube that makes you feel really angry, well, chances are that somebody is pulling your string. Chances are that somebody designed the message to be hyper emotional and to use that to mislead you or to change your attitudes.
I hear people say the same things, like, we don't understand what's true or false anymore. We're surrounded by this kind of deluge of stuff, of information, disinformation, misinformation. We feel everybody's biased, we feel everyone has an agenda, so we just have to kind of follow our emotions, our gut instincts to guide our way through. And of course, the powerful, authoritarian leaders, or those who'd like to be authoritarian, or anyone really, who wants to influence people, they also know they can't control the whole information system the way they used to. They can't force their one agenda down people's throats. A lot of them capitalize on this kind of, on the abundance of information. They flood the zone with so much information, disinformation, people become confused. And when they become confused and they can't think in terms of facts and evidence anymore, what becomes much more important is sort of emotion and tribal identity. So you have a whole movement of leaders across the world. They're not trying to be ideological anymore. They're not trying to win an argument about the best economic system and trying to prove that they're doing well, but they do appeal to these new forms of political identity. The real Americans, or the true people. Often we call this populism, but the thing to understand about this sort of digital populism, it's all about creating new identities, not essential ones, but new ones, which are very, very loose.
One of the ways in which prejudice and bias operate are that we attend to some of the information we have disproportionately whilst neglecting other information that we have. If we're prejudiced against a particular group, it might be, for instance, that we attend disproportionately to negative properties of that group. Even though we have beliefs that are more positive, we're not prioritising those, we're not using those in the ways in which we are reasoning. This can also be a problem when it comes to how we're selecting the body of evidence on the basis of which we're forming our beliefs. So if we don't maintain a kind of flexibility in our attentional patterns, it might be that there is evidence which is intuitively relevant to the kinds of questions that we're trying to resolve that we end up neglecting. And as a result of that, downstream, we end up forming beliefs which are less fitted for letting us function in the world, because although they fit the evidence, they only fit some subset of the evidence.
I think, as someone who's been working in this arena for many years now, we must, sooner or later, talk about the elephant in the room, which is the social media companies, Facebook, YouTube, Google. And we've got to think about, hey, what are these guys doing? What is their role in society? And what is it that we in a democracy as citizens want that role to be? And I think to solve the problem in the long run, we have to address the elephant in the room, and we have to think about smart ways of regulating the platforms without resorting to censorship.
Digital technology, particularly through the form of these giant social networks, it works with our cognitive biases. It encourages us to think quickly. It encourages immediate responses. It encourages forms of communication that are direct and are unmediated, so that if we feel something, if we respond to something, if we're angry, if we're upset, we have a means of passing our anger on straight away. And that really does cut against what representative democracy was meant to do for us, which was to allow us collectively to reach judgments on big political questions that were not impulsive. And democracy in the age of social media is increasingly driven by immediate impulses, because that's the business model of the platforms on which this democracy is happening. I mean, after all, the social media industry is basically a form of advertising. Its business model is advertising. And advertising, particularly in the age of Amazon, never mind Facebook, is designed to sell us stuff fast, impulsively, and relentlessly. And fast, impulsive, relentless politics can be bad for democracy.
People can be targeted with fake news specifically based on your online digital footprint. The sophistication of fake news has evolved. Think about deep fakes and fake videos. And so I think, while some of the classic ingredients are still the same in terms of how we manufacture propaganda, or how it's generally done, but the way in which it's targeted and delivered, has gone to a whole new level where actually people are making money off of the production of misinformation and propaganda, and the role of social media has amplified its reach, has complicated the dissemination through filter bubbles and echo chambers, which cause polarization. And so basically, I think what we're seeing is classic propaganda on steroids, and that's why it's so difficult to deal with at the moment. And I think one of the most important consequences and risks of fake news, misinformation, media manipulation is that it erodes people's trust in the media, in the government, and in official institutions. And when we lose that trust, we really lose the basis of democracy. If you wanted to know something, you could go on Google, you could go to Wikipedia, you could go to your library. You can find facts and high quality information so easily and efficiently, and you can share it with everyone. However, what appears to be the case is that people are not doing this. Our intuitive system of understanding the world is often taking over and being duped by fake news because our system too, our analytical and deliberative thinking is not kicking in appropriately. Being able to recognize it isn't always the same as actually, undoing or changing the way that you feel. And that partly has to do with social media. If you post something, you don't get any likes, it might make people feel bad. Social media has the power to shape the way that people feel too, and they've done research on it, on what they call, effective sentiments on social media and how they can manipulate the online sentiment on their platforms. And I think when we talk about multiple solutions, at the end of the day, it's important to realize though that social media companies make profit off of sharing and ads, and they don't have an inherent incentive to try to stop the spread of misinformation.
Like many psychologists, I am worried about the consequences of misinformation for how people form beliefs about the world. Now, our research on metacognition suggests that an important component of how we form beliefs is the capacity to reflect on whether we have an accurate belief or not. And if we realize that perhaps the way we're seeing a problem or an issue is distorted or misinformed, then that's a prompt, that's an internal signal that we can use to go out to seek out corrective information or to ask others for their opinion and so on. So we think that metacognitive aspect is important for people resisting polarization and misinformation.
What I think we need is what I call a multi-layer defense system. And so pre-bunk or inoculate everyone when we can. When that fails, we need to debunk and fact check in real time. We could have real-time rebuttals, real-time fact checking. When that fails, we can still debunk after the fact. And we also need to reorganize the way that social media is incentivized. And when we do all that, I think the chance that misinformation will get through and spread as fast, deep, and efficiently as it has so far will be greatly minimized.
People online, human beings who are acting on social media, have to make a decision to spread false information, for misinformation to go viral and to then influence our public discourse. And so in that sense, this whole idea of information being transmitted from one individual to another is very much like a disease. Now, it turns out that just as with a disease, one of the countermeasures for misinformation involves something we call inoculation. And inoculation means that we are exposing people to a small dose of misinformation. And in particular, what we expose them to is information about how misinformation is designed and what it is that people who want to mislead, what techniques they're using to spread their message. Now, it turns out that across many laboratory experiments and online experiments, this is successful. That is, if we expose people to misleading argumentation and tell them, hey, be careful, this is how you might be misled, then they become resistant to those messages subsequently. So it is a little bit like a vaccination, an inoculation, that is keeping at bay this invading misinformation or disease in the context of diseases. And that's how we can suppress the spread of misinformation. So the key challenge then is to get out these messages on a large scale and to make sure that people overall are inoculated against false information. And there are researchers around the world who are now working on precisely that problem.